Every morning, Chloe prayed the bruises on her jaw would fade before her shift. She believed surviving her mother's fists was her only destiny. Then the most feared man in Boston kicked down their door. He came to collect a bloody debt, but instead, he collected her. The smell of cheap Gordon's gin and stale Pall Mall cigarettes was the permanent perfume of Chloe's childhood. They lived in a rotting two-bedroom apartment off Dorchester Avenue in South Boston. The floorboards sagged, the radiators hissed a constant agonizing tune in the winter, and the walls were paper-thin, though the neighbors never called the cops. In their neighborhood, people minded their own business, especially when the screams came from Lorraine Bennett's apartment. Chloe was 21 years old, though. Looking at her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror, she could easily pass for 40. For as long as she could remember, she was her mother's personal punching bag. Lorraine was a woman hollowed out by addiction and bitter resentment. She blamed Chloe for the stretch marks on her stomach, for her father abandoning her, for the fact that she was fired from her nursing job at Boston Medical Center 10 years ago. To Lorraine, Chloe's very existence was a crime, and she was the relentless executioner. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in October, when Chloe's life fractured permanently. She had just finished a grueling 10-hour shift waitressing at a diner near the waterfront. Her feet were blistered, and her left shoulder still throbbed from where Lorraine had struck her with the heavy buckle of a leather belt 2 nights prior. She carefully pushed the front door open, praying her mother was passed out on the stained floral sofa. She wasn't. Lorraine was pacing the cramped living room, her greasy blonde hair sticking to her forehead. The coffee table was pushed aside, and the air was thick with a frantic, suffocating panic. "Where the hell have you been?" She hissed, her voice a raspy screech. She lunged, her manicured fingers twisting into Chloe's hair, yanking her head back so violently she saw white spots. "You useless little bitch! You hold out on me! You hiding tips! Mom, no please! I gave you everything on Friday!" Chloe choked out her hands, flying up to protect her face. Lorraine slapped her a sharp, ringing backhand that split Chloe's lower lip. The metallic taste of blood flooded her mouth. "It's not enough!" Lorraine screamed, spit flying onto her daughter's cheek. "They're coming, Chloe! They're coming tonight!" Before Chloe could ask who they were, 3 heavy, rhythmic knocks echoed against the peeling paint of their front door. It wasn't the frantic knocking of a neighbor. It was deliberate, patient, terrifying. Lorraine froze, all the venom drained from her face, replaced by a ghost-white terror. She shoved Chloe toward the hallway. "Get the door. Open the door." Trembling, Chloe wiped the blood from her chin and turned the deadbolt. The door swung open, and the temperature in the room seemed to plummet by 20 degrees. Standing in the dimly lit hallway were 3 men in tailored, immaculate suits that cost more than the apartment building. 2 were built like brick walls, their eyes scanning the room with bored indifference. But the man in the center commanded the space without moving a muscle. He was tall, with sharp, aristocratic features, dark hair swept back, and eyes as cold and gray as the Atlantic Ocean. Chloe recognized him instantly from the hushed, terrified whispers of the diner patrons. Vincent Moretti. He ran the syndicates, stretching from the North End all the way down to Providence. He was a phantom, a ghost story businessmen told each other when loans went unpaid. "Lorraine," Vincent said. His voice was smooth, deep, and laced with a quiet lethality. He stepped over the threshold, his polished Oxfords clicking against the cheap linoleum floor. "You missed our deadline. By 3 weeks." "Mr. Moretti." Lorraine whimpered, shrinking back against the peeling wallpaper. The monster who battered Chloe daily was suddenly nothing more than a cowering rat. "I have the money. I just need a few more days. The track. I had a bad run." $45,000, Lorraine. Vincent interrupted softly. He didn't yell. He didn't have to. I don't care about the track. I care about my ledger, and your page is bleeding. Please, she sobbed, dropping to her knees. It was pathetic. I don't have it, but I have something else. Chloe's stomach plummeted. She stepped back, trying to mold herself into the shadows of the hallway, but Lorraine's frantic eyes locked onto her. She pointed a trembling, bruised finger in Chloe's direction. Take her. Lorraine choked out her voice, desperate and breathless. She's 21. She's quiet. She works hard. You run those clubs, right? Take her. She'll work it off. Whatever you want her to do, she's yours. Just clear the debt. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the two massive enforcers behind Vincent exchanged a brief, unreadable glance. Vincent slowly turned his head to look at Chloe. His cold grey eyes swept over her frame. She was wearing an oversized, faded grey hoodie to hide the bruises on her arms, but she couldn't hide her face. He saw the swelling on her cheek. He saw the fresh blood dripping from her split lip, staining her collar. He saw the desperate, hollow terror in her eyes. Chloe waited for him to drag her out by her hair. She waited to be sold into a nightmare far worse than the one she was already living. Instead, Vincent Moretti did something she never expected. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her mother. He crouched down his immaculate suit pants, pulling taut until he was eye level with the woman who had birthed her. You are offering me your own flesh and blood, Vincent whispered, his voice dripping with an icy disgust that made Chloe's skin crawl. To pay for a gambling debt. She's nothing, Lorraine cried, completely misreading his tone. She's dead weight. Take her. She's a pretty thing under all that dirt, I swear. Vincent moved so fast, Chloe didn't even see his hand leave his side. He grabbed Lorraine by the throat, lifting her off her knees until she was choking her hands, clawing desperately at his iron grip. I despise a lot of things in this world, Lorraine. Vincent said, his face inches from hers. But nothing disgusts me more than a parent who feeds on their own child. He dropped her roughly to the floor. She gasped, dry heaving violently. Vincent stood up, adjusting his cuffs with terrifying calm. He didn't look at her again. He turned his imposing frame toward Chloe, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Get your coat, he commanded. Chloe was paralyzed. Am I going to die? She whispered. Vincent's expression softened just a fraction of an inch. If you stay here, you will. Get your coat, Chloe. He knew her name. Chloe had nothing to pack. The few meager possessions she owned, a battered copy of Wuthering Heights and a silver locket her grandmother gave her before she died, were stuffed into her pockets in seconds. She didn't dare make Vincent Moretti wait. As she walked back into the living room, Lorraine was still coughing on the floor. She looked up at Chloe, her eyes flashing with a sudden, vicious spite. You're dead to me, she spat. You hear me? You walk out that door with him. Don't you ever come back. Chloe didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Vincent gestured to one of his men, a giant with a scarred eyebrow named Matteo. The debt is cleared, Lorraine. Vincent said, his tone devoid of any emotion. But if you ever try to contact her again, or if I find out you're within 50 miles of this city, Matteo here will come back, and he won't knock. They left the apartment. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind them, severing Chloe's past like a guillotine. Outside on the rain-slicked street, a sleek, jet-black Maybach waited at the curb. Matteo opened the back door, and Chloe slid into the leather interior, terrified to even breathe too heavily. Vincent slid in beside her. The scent of him, sandalwood and expensive Cuban tobacco, was intoxicating, a stark contrast to the rot of Dorchester Avenue. The engine purred to life, and the car pulled away. Chloe watched the grimy streets of her childhood blur past the tinted windows. Her hands shook uncontrollably in her lap. She was sitting next to a man who ordered executions before breakfast. She was his property now. "You're bleeding," Vincent said quietly. She jumped, bringing a trembling hand to her lip. It was still oozing from where Lorraine had struck her. "I'm fine. I'm used to it." The words slipped out before she could stop them. She saw a muscle in Vincent's jaw feather. He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a pristine white silk handkerchief, offering it to her. She took it hesitantly, pressing it to her mouth. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Which club?" Vincent looked at her genuine confusion, knitting his dark brows together. "Club, to work off the debt. That's what she said. Whatever you want me to do." A tear slipped free, hot and humiliating, tracking down her bruised cheek. Vincent's gaze darkened, a dangerous shadow crossing his features. "Let me make something abundantly clear to you, Chloe. You are not a transaction. You are not going to work in my clubs, and I am not going to touch you. The debt was an excuse. I've been looking for you for a very long time." Her breath hitched. "Looking for me? Why?" The Maybach merged onto Altres Arsentage 93, heading away from the city proper and toward the sprawling, heavily wooded estates of Brookline. Vincent poured 2 fingers of amber liquid from a crystal decanter built into the center console, taking a slow sip before answering. "Your mother told you your father abandoned you before you were born. Is that correct?" he asked. "Yes." She said he was a drifter, a nobody. Vincent let out a short, humorless laugh. "Lorraine always was a miserable liar. Your father wasn't a nobody, Chloe. His name was Arthur Rossi. He was my mentor. He built the foundation of the syndicate I run today." The world tilted on its axis. The heavy thumping of Chloe's heart drowned out the hum of the tires. "Rossi," she whispered. I don't understand. If he was this powerful man, why did he leave me in that hellhole? Because he didn't know you existed." Vincent said, his voice tightening with a suppressed rage. "Lorraine was a fling. When she got pregnant, she vanished knowing Arthur's enemies would use a child against him. She hid you in plain sight using a different surname. Arthur died 5 years ago in a car bomb meant for both of us. He bled out in my arms." Vincent turned his grey eyes fully onto her, and for the first time, Chloe didn't see a ruthless mob boss. She saw a man bound by an unbreakable oath of loyalty. On his deathbed, Arthur told me about a rumor he'd heard, a whisper of a blonde nurse from Southie who had his child. He made me swear on my life to find you and protect you. It took my network half a decade to track through the fake names and off-the-books rent agreements Lorraine used. But we found you. Chloe sat in stunned silence. The bruises, the beatings, the starving nights, all of it happened while a completely different life was waiting for her. She wasn't just a stray dog picked up off the street. She was mafia royalty. The car slowed, turning past massive wrought-iron gates that swung open automatically. They drove up a long, winding driveway, lined with ancient oak trees, finally stopping in front of a sprawling stone mansion that looked like a fortress. Armed men in dark clothing patrolled the perimeter. "We're here," Vincent said, unbuckling his seatbelt. "I've called Dr. Harrison from Mass General. He's discreet, and he's going to look at your injuries. From this day forward, you lack for nothing. No one raises a hand to you ever again. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly, still trying to process the magnitude of her new reality. Chloe followed Vincent out of the car and up the sweeping marble steps of the estate. The heavy oak doors were pulled open by staff, who bowed their heads respectfully. "Welcome home, Miss Rossi," a stern-looking housekeeper said, taking Chloe's pathetic, rain-soaked coat. "Miss Rossi." Chloe looked at Vincent. He was watching her carefully, studying her reaction. She had traded a monster for a mafia boss. She was entirely out of her depth, plunged into a dangerous world of blood money and whispered secrets. But as she stood in the grand foyer, surrounded by men who carried guns under their tailored suits, Chloe realized something terrifying. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. But safety in the Moretti family is an illusion, and she was about to find out that her mother's debt was the least of her problems. The ghosts of her father's past were already hunting her, and the man who swore to protect her was hiding the darkest secret of all. The first few weeks at the Brookline estate were a blur of sterile bandages and hushed conversations. True to Vincent's word, Dr. Harrison from Mass General arrived within the hour of Chloe's rescue, a discreet black medical bag in hand. He documented her shattered ribs, the deep tissue bruising on her back, and the severe malnutrition that had left her bones brittle. As he worked, Vincent stood in the corner of the vast, silk-draped guest bedroom, his face carved from granite, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. "She needs rest, Mr. Moretti," Dr. Harrison had murmured, packing his stethoscope. "And a high-caloric diet. The physical trauma will heal in a month. The psychological toll, that is a different battlefield." Chloe's physical transformation was rapid. The gaunt, terrified waitress who flinched at sudden movements slowly morphed into a young woman who walked with her head held high. She was given a wardrobe of imported Italian cashmere and silk meals prepared by a private chef and unrestricted access to the estate's sprawling library. Yet she was a bird in a beautiful bulletproof cage. Armed men, Matteo, and a rotation of stoic guards like Lorenzo and Carmine were stationed at every exit. But her most constant suffocating and intoxicating presence was Vincent. They fell into a strange, unspoken routine. Every evening at 8, they dined together at the end of a long mahogany table. At first, the silence between them was heavy with her fear and his formidable reputation. But as the bruises on her face faded to a dull yellow, so did her terror. "You haven't touched your risotto," Vincent noted one evening in late November, setting down his crystal wine's glass. The firelight cast dancing shadows over his sharp jawline. "I was thinking," she replied, pushing the food around her plate, "about my father, Arthur. You said he died in a car bomb meant for both of you. Who planted it?" The temperature in the dining room seemed to drop. Vincent's gaze darkened the stormy grey of his eyes, shifting into something lethal. He leaned back in his chair, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "A man named Dominic Castellano." Vincent said his voice, a low, dangerous rumble. "He ran the drug trafficking routes through Providence. Arthur refused to let him push narcotics through our ports in Boston. Dominic decided the only way to expand was to remove the head of the Rossi family." "Did you catch him?" she asked, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Dominic fled to Sicily the night Arthur was killed," Vincent replied, his gaze dropping to the table. For a fraction of a second, the ruthless mafia boss looked incredibly weary. "I took over the syndicate, slaughtered Dominic's lieutenants, and fortified the city. But I never found him." Chloe swallowed hard, sensing the heavy burden of guilt he carried. "You blame yourself for my father's death." Vincent's eyes snapped up, locking onto hers. The intensity in his stare made her breath hitch. "I was driving the car, Chloe. I turned the key. Arthur realized what was happening a second before the ignition sparked. He threw himself over the center console and shielded me from the blast." He stood up abruptly, pacing toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the frozen grounds. "He died choking on his own blood, and my life was spared. So yes, I blame myself. And my penance was finding you. She stood from the table, her silk dress whispering against the hardwood floor. Driven by an instinct she didn't fully understand, Chloe walked over to the most dangerous man in New England and gently placed her hand on his broad shoulder. He went entirely rigid at her touch, as if he had been struck by lightning. "You saved me from a monster, Vincent," she whispered, stepping closer until she could smell the sandalwood and tobacco clinging to his shirt. "You don't owe me a debt. You gave me my life back." Vincent turned to face her. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his chest. His eyes dropped to her lips, lingering there for a breathless eternity before dragging back up to meet her gaze. Slowly, hesitantly, he raised a large, calloused hand and cupped her cheek. His thumb brushed over the faint, fading scar on her lower lip, the last physical reminder of Lorraine's cruelty. "If I had known you were suffering in that squalor," he murmured, his voice hoarse, "I would have burned South Boston to the ground to get to you sooner." The tension strung between them was electric, thick with a dangerous, forbidden pull. She leaned into his touch, her eyelids fluttering shut. But before he could close the distance, the heavy oak doors of the dining room burst open. Matteo stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, an uncharacteristic panic in his eyes. In his massive hand, he held a small, blood-soaked cardboard box. Vincent dropped his hand from her face, instantly transforming back into the cold, calculating syndicate leader. "What is it, Matteo?" "A courier just dropped this at the front gate," Matteo growled, stepping into the room. He set the ruined box on the table. "The guards detained him, but the kid knows nothing. Just got paid $100 to deliver it." Vincent pulled a silver switchblade from his pocket and flicked it open, slicing the tape. He used the tip of the blade to flip open the cardboard flaps. Chloe peered over his shoulder and gasped. Sitting on a bed of crimson-stained cotton was a heavy gold Rolex. The glass face was shattered, and the hands were permanently frozen at 11:42, the exact time she would later learn that the bomb had detonated 5 years ago. Arthur's watch. Vincent breathed his voice, laced with pure, unfiltered rage. Tucked beneath the watch was a handwritten note on expensive cream cardstock. Vincent picked it up. He didn't read it aloud, but as his eyes scanned the words, the blood drained entirely from his face. He looked at Chloe, a terrifying realization dawning in his eyes. "Lock down the estate," Vincent ordered Matteo, his voice eerily calm. "Double the perimeter guards. No one gets in or out." "Vincent, what does the note say?" she demanded, her old fears rushing back like a tidal wave. He handed her the card. Her hand shook as she read the elegant cursive handwriting. "I hear the Rossi bloodline didn't die in the fire after all." "See you soon, Vinny." DC Dominic Castellano was back in Boston, and he was coming for her. The Brookline estate became a heavily guarded fortress overnight. They lived in a state of suffocating paranoia. Steel shutters sealed the sprawling windows. External landlines were severed, and Chloe was strictly forbidden to take a single step without Matteo's looming presence or Vincent's intense protective shadow right beside her. Every night, Vincent sat in a velvet armchair in the corner of her suite, a suppressed Sig Sauer resting on his knee, his cold grey eyes continuously scanning the dark doorway. They were waiting for a phantom to strike, and the anticipation was a slow, agonizing poison. The assault began on a freezing Friday night, with an absolute terrifying silence. The low hum of the estate's massive backup generators abruptly died, plunging the entire mansion into a pitch-black abyss. "Get down!" Vincent roared. He tackled her to the Persian rug just a second before the reinforced glass of the master suite imploded. A hail of automatic gunfire shredded the room, tearing through heavy silk curtains and pulverizing the plaster walls. The deafening roar echoed through the mansion, immediately followed by the aggressive, chaotic shouts of Vincent's men returning fire. "Stay on the floor," Vincent commanded, his voice a sharp, commanding blade in the dark. He drew his weapon smoothly, rolling to his feet and slipping out into the smoke-filled hallway. Chloe lay trembling in the dark, the acrid smell of cordite and dust burning her lungs as the house erupted into a violent war zone. 10 minutes later, the relentless gunfire ceased, replaced by heavy, deliberate footsteps. The shattered suite door was kicked off its hinges. Emergency backup lights flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow across the ruined room. Standing in the doorway was a weather-beaten man in a bespoke charcoal suit. He held a high-powered revolver pressed tightly against the temple of a bleeding, staggering Vincent. "Well, well," Dominic Castellano rasped a cruel, satisfied smile, twisting his scarred face. "Arthur's little bastard. You definitely have your father's eyes." "Let her go, Dominic." Vincent spat blood dripping from a deep gash on his forehead. "She has nothing to do with our business." "Oh, but she has everything to do with it, Vinny." Dominic laughed, gesturing to his two heavily armed enforcers who stepped in behind him. "Arthur humiliated me. I swore I'd erase his legacy from the earth. Imagine my surprise when a miserable drunk from South Boston called me to offer up a bargaining chip." Chloe's blood ran cold. "What?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Didn't Vincent tell you?" Dominic sneered, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Who do you think told me Arthur's schedule 5 years ago? Your mother, Chloe. Lorraine Bennett owed my bookies 50 grand. She sold Arthur out for pocket change. The floor beneath her felt like it was crumbling away. Lorraine hadn't just beaten her. She was her father's murderer. When she found out you were looking for the girl," Dominic continued, speaking to Vincent, "she panicked. She called me begging for protection, offering to hand her over to me. But you beat my men to that Dorchester apartment by a matter of minutes." "You sick son of a bitch!" Vincent growled, his muscles tensing. "Time to finish the job," Dominic sighed, pointing his heavy revolver straight at Chloe's chest. Before Dominic could blink, Vincent exploded into motion. He threw his weight backward, slamming his elbow into Dominic's face with a sickening crunch. The gun fired wildly, the bullet tearing through Chloe's silk sleeve and burying deep into the wall. Vincent viciously wrestled the weapon away. In 2 fluid, merciless motions, he shot the enforcers dead, then turned and unloaded the rest of the cylinder into Dominic's chest. The rival boss dropped dead onto the ruined carpet. The deafening echo of the gunshots faded, leaving only Vincent's ragged, heavy breathing. He dropped the gun and turned to her, covered in blood, and looking terrified of her reaction. "You knew," she whispered, hot tears spilling over her cheeks. "You knew Lorraine set up the hit." Vincent dropped to his knees, his hands hovering, as if he felt too dirty to touch her. "I found out a week after I took you in. I swear to God, Chloe, I was going to kill her. But she's your mother. I couldn't be the man who murdered the only family you had left. I couldn't let you look at me and see a monster." She stared at the ruthless, feared Mafia Boss who had absorbed her pain, shielded her from a truth, and nearly died to keep her safe. "She is not my family," Chloe said, her voice steady. "You are." She reached out, pulling him forward. Vincent let out a choked breath, burying his face in her stomach and holding on to her like an anchor in a raging storm. Lorraine thought she was selling her daughter to pay a debt. Instead, she handed her the crown of the Boston underworld. Did Chloe's jaw-dropping journey from an abused waitress to the queen of the Boston underworld leave you speechless? The line between monster and protector is razor thin, and Vincent proved that sometimes the greatest love stories are born in the darkest shadows. If you were glued to the edge of your seat by this thrilling mafia romance, hit that like button. Share this incredible real-life inspired drama with your friends. And subscribe to our channel for more unforgettable stories.